I've been reading for a long time. I'm old now, many decades under my belt, but I still buy books. My name is Timothy Verkala, and I'm going to be talking about the books that I bought today. That's all I'm going to do on this video. I'm not going to put it as part of my audio podcast or anything like that. So locofoco.net won't get it, though I think I will put it up on locofoco.locals.com, which is my Locofoco sponsor page if anyone chose to sponsor me. I live in the country, and once or twice a month, I go to town and buy books. Today, I went eastward and went to a bookstore. And the owner of the bookstore every now and then goes through whatever boxes of incoming books and goes through and puts the ones that she thinks she can sell at a decent price into the shelves, and then puts the rest in a discount box for $2 a piece. And it's those books that I tend to buy, because those are the ones from my childhood. They're the ones I didn't buy when I was young, didn't know to buy when I was young, but it's the beginning of my entry into the world. And for some reason, I have this kind of strange attraction to books published in the year of my birth or thereabouts, and those from the decades immediately following. I have very little interest in the literature being produced today. It amuses me that I don't find contemporary writing very interesting. I got interested in reading largely through fantasy and some science fiction, and then became an avid reader of those genres, but also of mainstream literature in my teen years. And one of my favorite books at age 16 was the Alexandria Quartet by Lawrence Durrell. And I quickly began reading other books by Lawrence Durrell. And one book that I picked up in Penguin, a Penguin paperback, and read and didn't care for was called Pope Joan. And today I bought the hardcover Overlook press edition of Pope Joan. And here we are. This is from the 70s. And this is really not Lawrence Durrell. It's a translation and adaptation from the work of Emmanuel Roedius. And I'm going to give it another shot. Shot number 2. It's possible that at age 17 or 18, when I read this the first time, I was not mature enough to handle it. But I handled Alexandria Quartet just fine, so that's interesting. So that's an experiment. That's an experiment in personal nostalgia, right? And here is another book that I read when I was young, but older, because here we are. It's the 1980s, 1981, when this edition of Gene Wolfe's The Shadow of the Torturer was published. The Shadow of the Torturer is the first volume of the great Book of the New Sun. I was greatly impressed when I read this. I don't know if I read it in hardcover or in this edition. This is, I think this is the paperback edition of this book to get. There are many books, many printings of these novels. Since then, they don't interest me. In the 80s, the quality of covers, of the artwork, and the typefaces, I think, went down as they went glossy and minimalist. And I generally don't like most of the 1980s paperbacks and hardcovers. Even over time, I think that the quality of their covers went down generally in the 1980s, and especially the 1990s. And that might be part of the reason that I just don't find these books very interesting anymore, contemporary literature very interesting anymore, is that I don't think that publishers have a very deep interest in presenting a cover that will attract audiences. And I think that that's sort of one of the job of the publisher, and I think that the publishers have given up on it in an interesting way. But the Timescape series by Pocket Books in the 1980s was an exception to that rule. Del Rey was going very bad covers at that period, and many other science fiction publishing houses began cheapening, and just there's kind of a Drek quality to one of the illustrations in the 1980s and 90s. And the flirtation with embossed lettering and that kind of thing was a novelty at the time, but they just skimped on the artwork. And that's not the case with this edition of The Shadow of the Torturer. And this was in the $2 bin at the bookstore that I go to. And I think the owner of the store made a mistake, because I think this book commands a price, a premium, I should say, uh, in this edition. Is that it's harder to find a good quality Timescape Book of the New Sun edition. And I have one, but it's in much worse shape than this. So this is a $2 upgrade for me, and I'm very happy about that. I'll probably get rid of the other one at some point. So that is a welcome addition. And I should say that the Book of the New Sun is really one of the best science fiction novels I've ever read. It's, I don't know exactly what to say about it. It's very Vancian, but it's advanced Vance. And I'm talking about Jack Vance's Dying Earth and Kugel Saga books. And I'm a big Jack Vance fan. I think Jack Vance and Philip K. Dick are the two really interesting science fiction writers who, with feet firm in the pulp tradition, that nevertheless transcended pulp in the 1950s and 60s. They have sort of parallel careers. Jack Vance was the better writer as writer. There is no doubt about that. But I would say that Philip K. Dick reached to bigger themes, usually better. But Jack Vance was far more subtle. And the Dying Earth book is a great book of interlocked short stories about a millions of years advanced future where the sun goes red and humanity has become decadent, and where technology and science are indistinguishable from magic and are kept alive as magic by magicians. And that's a fun way to combine fantasy and science fiction. There is an interesting distinction between fantasy and science fiction, and that's something I want to talk about in future episodes of either my podcast, localvoco.net, or whatever I put up on, here on Rumble or in YouTube Workman page. And that's Workman with an I, not an O. That's my middle name. Workman with an I, not an O. Okay, so that was an interesting $2 addition to my library. This is another one, $2 edition. I know nothing about this book other than what you can see right on the cover. It's not a bad illustration, and it's the Cruachan and the Chilean. I don't know what that means. It's by an author who goes by one name, as if she or he were Cher or Bono or whatever, or Ouida. That would be a great example from the 19th century. Ouida, right? Ouida. I think that's how you pronounce it, as Ouida. But this is by Christabel. I've never heard of Christabel. This novel I know nothing about, but it's in great shape. So I was happy to buy it and may someday read it. Or if not, I'll sell it someday. Or maybe I'll die and it'll go to somebody interesting, maybe a family member, maybe one of my friends, or maybe it will be picked at in the corpses of some bookseller in the future. Okay, Out of Bounds. Here is a Judith Merrill collection, a collection of 7 Judith Merrill short stories with a introduction by Theodore Sturgeon, who was a great short story writer. Now, I am most fond of some of Sturgeon's short stories. I've read no Merrill. I know who she is, but I bought it on a whim because I like the cover. That's it. One of the important things about covers, and what publishers should know, they're falling off the job so badly these days, is that they're not giving people the right kind of covers to entice them to read their books. I think that this is one of the reasons why reading has declined in a certain way, and maybe even more literature has declined. The high point of pulp science fiction is certainly long gone. But I was going to talk about Sturgeon a little bit, because Sturgeon is an important writer historically for science fiction. I've read 2 of his novels, The Dreaming Jewels and Godbody. Godbody was actually a posthumous work, and he never really completed it, and that might explain why I disliked it so much. But I think the premise was not a very good premise. There's a lot of cheap takes on God in science fiction, and I don't like all of them. If you're going to bring in the God to upgrade your concepts, you better do it real well, is all I'm saying. And I don't think Godbody was it. The Dreaming Jewels, I remember nothing about it, but I've read a number of short stories by Theodore Sturgeon, and a few of them were very, very good. And he was a talented writer, and he has contributed one of the most important concepts in popular culture, Sturgeon's Law. 90% of everything is crap. or is it 95, or is it 98? It's some percentage, quite high, of everything is trash. That's what we know. Now, those are books that the last one, Out of Bounds, actually came in the mail before I went to town today. And this also came in the same batch. This is The Altered Ego by Jerry Soule. Soule was a contributor to Twilight Zone, the television series, and he wrote a novel called The Haploids that I read earlier this year, which I wish I could recommend. The premise is great. The first half of it is great, but as the story works through its paces, uh, it becomes kind of dependent on cliches of romance that are kind of embarrassing and not deep. And it should have been deep. It would make a good movie if rewritten properly. The Alter Ego, I know nothing about it other than what is suggested by the title. And this is a pedant book, 25 cents. And 25 cents means that's probably the 1950s. So what do we have here? 1950s, 1954. It looks like it was a pedant edition, January 1955. So there we are. That's what that book is. I was very interested in this period, of course, because this is the era, the epoch of our civilization into which I entered. And so I'm trying to get a little handle on this before I leave this mortal coil. And I'd like to sort of understand reality a little bit better. And I think one of the ways is by fiction. That's a perhaps controversial thesis. I don't think it should be, but it is for some people because, you know, the common lowbrow uh, response to when somebody says, I'm reading this great book and says, oh, yeah, is it? When? Says, well, it's based on a true story and all that's supposed to sell it. That doesn't sell it for me. And that's an interesting subject, which I will not explore further anymore. Here is another book that came in the, nope, this is what I bought today in town. This is a pyramid book, 35 cents. So this is most likely late in the 50s. It's The Tomorrow People. And yeah, 1960. It's a novel by Judith Merril. Once again, like I said, Judith Merril was an important editor and promoter of the new wave in America. She moved to Canada, I believe, part of the anti-Vietnam craze, which I certainly support, though she was a left-winger, which I don't pretend to support. Here is another, this is a smaller size paperback. This is an ace double from the 1950s, originally sold for 50 cents. Maybe it's not 1950s, maybe it's 1960s. Let's look. Oh, this is what one of the things about ace doubles is that I'm not sure I ever know exactly when they were printed. It says 1956 and 1954 are the years for the two novels included in this ace double. So here, that's upside down. Turn it right side up. That's 3,000 Years, a novel by Thomas Calvert McClary, of whom I know nothing. And then on the other side, when you flip it right over, is The Green Queen by Margaret St. Clair. Margaret St. Clair was an important woman science fiction writer of this period. I enjoy the ace doubles. Here is another ace in miniature paperback format. These are the kind that can fit into a pocket nicely, and that's a good thing about them. They're basically, in whiskey terms, they're a finger shorter than a normal paperback, a finger shorter. And this is Cordwainer Smith, Quest of the Three Worlds. And I believe this is 3 linked stories, but I'm not sure. I've not read it. But Cordwainer Smith has probably my favorite prose style of writers in science fiction from this period. He was also quite a thinker. He expanded the minds of nearly everyone who read him. Very clever man. He was also Paul Linebarger, who was the godson of Sun Yat-sen, I believe, and he was also a major expert in psychological warfare and wrote a textbook on the subject. Not as Cordwainer Smith, but as Paul Linebarger, or something like that. Linebarger, I believe. Okay, I'll check that and put it on the screen if I've made a mistake. So here's World Out of Mind. And what is World Out of Mind? It's a novel I bought on a whim online. It came in the mail earlier today. It's by J.T. Mantosh. It's probably Macintosh. There's an apostrophe where the C should be or the AC should be. I don't know why the person did that. I don't know anything about this novel, but it says it's the story of a man created without emotions to mastermind the conquest of Earth. This idea of an emotionless intelligence has been with us in science fiction for a long, long time. This book was 25 cents, so and it's from Perma Books, and I assume that's from the 1950s. So we look under the cover, and it says 1955, first printing by Perma Perma Books. So that's a really high quality paperback, and I'm very interested in that. Just the theme itself, that idea of an emotionless intelligence being a tyrant. That's a deep subject in science fiction, and it is certainly worthwhile thinking about now that we're contemplating what artificial intelligence may be, and it's just aped intelligence. It's a very interesting problem we're dealing with because we are going to have to deal with this, and maybe we are dealing with it now and we don't know about it. Anyway, final book that came in today. I bought it actually in town. It's another miniature paperback, so it will fit nice in my pocket. And that is Away and Beyond. It's by A.E. Van Vogt. I know nothing about it, but it was published at 35 cents. So there were, once again, I'm guessing that it was published around the time of the year of my birth. And it says February 1959, so very close to when I was born. So there we are, what I bought today. And I want to talk about one more book. One more book. It's a book that I read this week. I'm going to go back and reach for it. The Martian Sphinx. Now, it's not a bad cover. It's an Ace F320, 40 cents. So we're talking here is the early 60s, maybe mid 60s. Let me check. 1965. It's by Keith Woodcott, which means John Brunner. This was, he wrote a number of early books under the Woodcott name. And John Brunner became, of course, a major science fiction author. This is an extremely intelligent book. Intelligence just sits on every sentence, basically. It's a well-written book. The premise is fascinating. The first half of it is good novel writing for science fiction. It's really good at what it does. And it has a great adventure scene, like about halfway through or maybe a little bit further into the book, where we see a spaceship conquer the explorers on Mars and near the Martian Sphinx. Now, the ending is the intellectual working out and solution to a puzzle. And so as a novelistic endeavor, the ending is subpar because it's pretty much all intellectual. It's all puzzle solving. It's really the mystery box on Mars and the meaning of the participation of other species on Mars, two other species and possible other ones. It's not a classic because the ending is too intellectual, I think. It's too much of a puzzle book. It's a box. It's what's in the box. We find out what's in the box. That's basically the kind of thing we're talking about here. I really like this book right up to the ending. I don't dislike the ending. The ending is fine, but it's not great. It can't be great because it pulls back from the human story and gives us a very intellectual science fiction working out of the premises. That's basically the solution to a puzzle. And so what we have here is kind of the science fiction version of a mystery. And the mystery is presented early on, and then it's worked out in the course of a novel, but it's not very human or even all that alien in feel. It's not as novelistic as it could be. So it is a failure in some sense. The Martian Sphinx is a failure of a book. But I think it's nevertheless pretty good. It's pretty intelligent. One of the more intelligent novels from that period that I've read recently. So I actually recommend it to those who are interested in science fiction from the 60s. It is John Brunner. It's not incompetently written. There's a lot of highly praised novelists from that period who don't write as well as John Brunner. And it's not experimental in any way. It is science fiction. So as such, it's very interesting. and the question of alien artifacts, which is on our mind a lot nowadays, considering that the lore of ufology is filled with this kind of discussion, and the ancient alien discussion is part of our popular culture now, and is probably giving birth to a religion in our time. This kind of novel is the kind of thing that we might want to read to get a handle on what's going on in our time. Now, I know when I was a science fiction reader as a young person, I was basically a skeptic, as we say. Skeptic. That means that you not merely doubted what other people thought of a religious nature or UFOs or whatever. You ridiculed them because the place for UFOs, of course, was in science fiction, not in reality. So if you believed in UFOs, blah, 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 that was pretty. Now, of course, that's all out the window because of some rather interesting revelations from the government. But what the government's been saying is not at all clear. What the meaning of it all is not at all clear. We must still make sense of it ourselves. And for that reason, we might want to consult science fiction and science fictional types of minds, because we are not in the realm of just simple facts. Something strange is going on in our world, and maybe we should expand our minds with science fiction again, intelligent science fiction, to get a handle on reality. So that's one of my theories about why one should still read science fiction. And it's interests me to read science fiction of the past and see the themes in popular culture of alleged reality from ufology, for instance. The stamp of science fiction is all over it, and that says interesting things about both endeavors, trying to make sense of UFOs and trying to make sense of literature and humanity and what it means to be human, for that is one of the big subjects. And with that, I guess I will just conclude this, edit this up as fast as I can, and put it up at my YouTube Workman page and my Rumble page, Workman with an I, and I don't know. It will not be part of the Locofoco Netcast, which is at locofoco.net. I have a longer, similar book haul piece that's been in my in basket of things to do for the last 2 weeks that I will put up, I think, on my podcast, but we'll see.